Hi, I'm Lynn Gower and I'm from Elongate Seafood School, preparing this module on species recognition of fish and shellfish. Species recognition of fish and shellfish. The module can be split into 8 to 10 study sessions plus the examination. Each study section should take between 10 and 20 minutes, so around a total of 150 minutes plus the examination. The number of study sessions will depend upon whether the trainer thinks that roundfish, flatfish and the others should be taught as separate units, and whether he or she wants to devote separate study sessions for the different classifications of shellfish. Trainers should encourage students to further study in their own time. For example, the points of the fish and the illustrated list of species, which you will see at the end of the presentation, can both be made available online or as a printable download. The units can be taught face-to-face with fresh fish and shellfish or online via a video link using fresh fish or a PowerPoint PDF of each topic using photographs and or fresh fish. We've split the unit into various parts, which are to include the basic shapes of finfish, the species within the basic body shape, identifying parts of the fish, fin patterns and base colours, and then we should talk about common fish with similar colours and how to identify them and how to separate the differences. I talk about the lateral line, the spines, the barbules and other features which help in identification, and then lastly shellfish are covered separately. To make identification simpler, it's easier to categorise fish into their natural shape pattern. So round fish, flat fish, which would include the rays, irregular fish, which don't fit into either of those categories, and elongates, which include all of the eel family. So for round fish, you need to tell the students that the body shape is cylindrical or cigar or torpedo shape, and that if they cut a section horizontally through the fish, it will be almost circular, which will make a steak. Talk about the eyes, the positioning of the eyes and how it swims, and touch on the lateral line, where it is, what it is, and what differences can be between lateral lines in different fish. Then you should include the common roundfish, which included here are cod, haddock, coley, whiting, pollock, sea bass, bream, tusk and so on. Then oily fish and game fish, and explain the differences between them to the students. These should be country specific, so there may be fish in your country which are not included in this list, which are actually commonly sold. You need to adapt that to your particular country. When we move on to talk about flatfish, which would probably be a separate learning module, again, talk about the body shape, what it would look like if you cut a section through the fish. In this case, it's not a circular steak, it would be like a flattened diamond shape. Talk about the eyes and tell the difference between sinistral, which is left-handed or left-eyed, and dextral or right-handed or right-eyed fish. The way the fish swims, talk about the lateral line again, the fins, the colour, particularly the colour on each side is generally different, not always. And then talk about some the common flatfish which are commonly sold in your country. I include the rays as well. So whatever, if you have other rays which are not included in this list, then you should specify them for your students. And then we can move on to irregular fish. These are fish where the body shape does not easily fall into either flat or round fish. The most common examples here would be monkfish and John Dory. Explain to the students which part of the fish is eaten and why they are different. Why the John Dory, for example, is not a flat fish, because it has an eye on each side of its body mainly. And then the elongates, depending upon what eels are sold in your country, you need to specify the differences between a common eel and a conger eel. Talk about the fins, the body shape, and a section cut through the fish would be more like a round fish as it's steak, but not like a flatfish. Then this is a generic picture of a fish. There is no fish which would have all of these features, but you can explain to the students which are the dorsal fins, which are the pectoral pectoral fins, what an adipose fin is and which species would have it, the caudal fin, the lateral line, the barbules, of which fish have barbules, what the gills are and what they do. This is just to aid identification. Fin pattern can be quite important, so you do need to stress that the students must know what the fins are, which fins are which. So this is to give you an aid memoir of the things that you need to talk about to the students and demonstrate, either if you have if you're doing a video, then you can actually have a whole fish and point out on an actual fish what all of these fins are, what all of these points of the fish are. So fin patterns, base colour is another important thing. Most fish have a base colour, but you can include in here any shading. Some fish are much darker on the top and lighter shades towards the belly. Some fish have spots, most notably plaice, but salmon also have spots, and any other markings which will help to aid identification. Then you should take each sector separately and go through common fish which are similar and which can be mistaken. For example, cod, whiting, pollock could be, the cod and pollock particularly are reasonably similar in colour and shape. Haddock and coley could be mistaken for someone who doesn't know what they're looking at. And the same with a flatfish, to tell the difference between a flounder and a dab, for example. So you just use the fish which are most commonly sold in your country. Moving on to shellfish, explain what shellfish are, but they are marine and freshwater animals which have an external skeleton, and they are subdivided into bivalves, gastropods, crustaceans and cephalopods, and explain what each are. So the first slide example is a bivalve is something which has two shells hinged together, and the species which fall into that category are mussels, scallops, clams, oysters, cockles. I'm sure you can think of others which are specific for your students. A gastropod, usually it has one shell, and it's usually a spiral shape. The animal moves using its foot, which is the edible part, which protrudes from the open end of the shell. For example, whelks and winkles. They're the two most commonly sold in the UK. Crustaceans have a jointed body, and this includes lobsters, prawns, crabs, langoustines and shrimps. And you probably need to go into detail with each of these species, explaining that, for example, that the way they move, that the lobster moves in a particular way using its legs and tail. The crab moves in a different way just using its legs, etc. But mostly what you must concentrate on is that what you're doing is trying to help students to learn to identify fish and shellfish. Cephalopods are actually in fact mollusks, but although they do not have an external skeleton, but they are commonly sold are squid, octopus and cuttlefish, and explain the differences between them and how the students can tell whether something is a squid or a cuttlefish, for example. And then for your students, if you go back to the generic picture of the fish and ask them to identify all of the points on the right of the picture, and they should be able to correctly identify all of the fins, what are barbules, etc. And then this is a list of the fish which you should cover, but there may be others that are specific to your country, and there may be some on this list which you never sell in your country, so that you have to adapt this list to be specific to your own students. And then we move on to the examination. The examination content, it consists of 30 multiple choice questions. About 75% of them involve recognition of species from pictures, but if possible, this maybe should be done face to face with fresh fish and shellfish, it's much easier to identify from fresh fish than from pictures. And maybe the examination should be timed, and the examination questions again should be tailored to each country to include the species which are commonly sold there. Here are the sample questions. So, for example, in this first question is a picture of a pollock, and the student has to identify between cod, haddock, pollock and coley, and tick the answer, and then it will then move on to the next question. In this case, it is a coley. So again, the students by this time should know enough to be able to recognise these fish purely from pictures. Some of the others are maybe more difficult. The same questions about, we have flatfish here, and this one is a lemon sole. So students should be able to correctly identify that. If you have other flatfish which are commonly sold, you can use those in your examination. Then we have a sample question of shellfish. Shellfish, are they these particular ones? Winkles, whelks, shrimps and oysters. Some of the questions are relatively easy, but some of them are actually much more difficult than that. And we have some which are not visual, so which is just a knowledge. For example, which of the following is not a bivalve? Choose from mussel, scallop, whelk and Venus clam. Obviously it's whelk because whelk is a cephalopod. And then, do they know what a caudal fin is? This question is this is one of the more difficult questions. You have a picture only showing the fillets. Again, by this time the students should be able to recognise a fish purely from the fillet, and then they are asked to identify the whole fish. Thank you very much for your attention.